In this New World Aeternum Flail and Shield build guide, we'll be covering the Flail and Shield. You can use the Flail on its own if you prefer, however you won't be able to make use of some skills in either skill line. That said, it's still an option if you're trying to manage your weight. The Flail and Shield scale both with strength and focus, but they benefit more from strength. So if you're planning on focusing on this weapon combo, it's a good idea to prioritize strength over focus in your build. One thing that really sets the Flail and Shield apart from other melee weapons is its ability to heal while attacking, which is not something many weapons can do. Additionally, the Flail can also heal allies, which is even less common, making it not only a damaging weapon, but also a great support weapon as well. The Flail also has wide horizontal sweeps that can hit many targets simultaneously, which is great for AoEing enemies when questing in dungeons or when PvPing in medium to larger battles. And since it does strike damage, it can be effective against enemies the sword is not. This makes Sword and Shield and Flail and Shield a dynamic pairing, swapping when another damage type is needed. The Flail and Shield can also set Impairment, which is a status effect that not only causes damage over time, but also reduces the damage of the target by inflicting weaken. As far as I know, it's the only weapon that can set this status, which is one of the best, if not the best statuses out there. The other thing of note is that the Flail and Shield has no attacks that use the shield, unlike Sword and Shield, so the damage of your shield won't factor much into Flail and Shield gameplay. However, equip load and the type of shield you're using do impact some of your Flail and Shield skills, so you should still keep that in mind when determining which shield type to use. There are 3 different types of shields in New World Aeternum, and they operate similarly with some slight differences. Round shields are the lightest, with the lowest block stability but highest damage. Block stability determines how much stamina is consumed when you block an attack. Use this shield type if you plan to maximize your damage by keeping your equip load light, which is ideal for questing or 1v1 PvP, but not so great for tanking expeditions or larger scale PvP where you might need to block a lot. Kite shields are twice as heavy as round shields, have 10% more block stability, and deal about 20% less damage. They are a solid middle ground between tankiness and damage, and are best used by those that plan to play a mix of offensively and defensively when playing Flail and Shield. Tower shields are twice as heavy as kite shields, which is a lot, and have 10% more block stability than kite shields, but do roughly 10% less damage than them. They are the ideal choice for would-be tanks in larger PvP battles and in expeditions, where they will be absorbing a large number of attacks. The pros of this weapon type are that it has a good balance between offense and defense, it has high survivability, it's great if you want to play a tank, and it has great range for a melee weapon. The cons of this weapon type are the damage output isn't as high as some other weapons, and it uses no shield skills, despite using a shield. Moving on to the skill trees of the Flail and Shield, starting with the Cleric tree. This one focuses on dealing arcane damage and healing allies. If you're using Flail and Shield while in a group and want some off heals, or maybe you're the only heals in your group, this is a great line to take. So the first ability in the Cleric tree is called Arcane Smite. This does decent arcane damage, so if you're wanting to deal arcane damage, you might use this ability. And it kind of does like an overhead smash that leaves like a debuffed area on the ground that will debuff enemies standing in it, which will cause them to deal less damage and also take damage over time while standing in it. This is obviously great to use if you can group up enemies tightly and then land it on a group of enemies. Upgrading this skill will reduce its cooldown per enemy hit, will provide different bonuses based on the type of shield that you're using, and will also buff allies in the area, including giving them lifesteal when they attack enemies for a short amount of time. That is improved with the focus stat. So if you're planning on pairing this with a life staff or Void Gauntlet and going very heavily into focus, this would definitely be a good upgrade to take and a good weapon skill to use. The next ability is Arcane Vortex, which does reduce damage per hit, but hits multiple times while spinning the flail around over your head while dealing damage to the enemy, arcane damage that is, and also buffing allies within. As you improve this ability, you'll also root enemies hit repeatedly inside. You'll buff yourself and allies with haste, as well as heal allies in the target area of this spin. So this is a great skill when used in a group in order to buff your allies as well. And the last active skill is called Arcane Eruption. This is kind of like a whip motion looking attack where you kind of like swipe really quick with your flail and then flick it towards the target afterward. The swipe doing arcane damage, the follow-up doing strike damage. And it also leaves 2 stacks of impairment on the target, so they're going to do reduced damage to you while those are going on, and they're also going to take damage over time. Upgrading the skill will make it so that it slows targets, that it also extends the duration of status debuffs on the target, and that it also heals allies for a percentage of the damage dealt, as well as heals yourself for less than that, but still heals you. So this is good, again, to have in a party when you upgrade it. And one thing I want to mention is that all three of these skills, while they'll heal allies, will also heal yourself. So you can still use them to heal yourself, although obviously they're going to be more effective in a group where you're healing multiple people with it. The capstone for this tree is called Better Together, and essentially what it does is it heals you and allies around you every so often, as long as you have one or more ally around you. So this isn't even going to trigger if you're playing solo. So if you're questing, this is not by yourself. This is not a good capstone to have. But if you're playing in a group, this is very, very good. And you should definitely have this if you're playing with a Flail and Shield in a group at all. It's arguably one of the best capstone abilities in the game in a group setting. So moving along to the Bastion skill tree, this skill tree focuses primarily on reducing damage to yourself along with buffing allies and crowd control. So the first ability in this tree is called Barrage. It's sort of a gap closing ability that will charge forward, you'll leap into the air and slam your weapon down for strike damage. You don't deal a ton of damage using this weapon skill, but if you have a taunt gem in your weapon, this will taunt the target. So this could be a good way to grab aggro on a target while you're like tanking a dungeon or something like that. It can also be very useful for catching up to a fleeing PvP player, or just getting into melee range with another PvP player quickly while your friendlies are behind you ranging things down. Upgrading the skill will provide you with Fortify, increasing your armor, will do different things depending on the type of shield that you're using, will allow you to block automatically without consuming stamina during the leap portion of the attack, and will also increase the damage that you deal on the final attack, along with Fortify allies to increase their protection. The next skill is called Trip. This has a very, very short range, deals very low damage from melee attack, but does knock the target down. So it's good if you need to knock a target down to prevent them from attacking you. It's great when questing, in dungeons, and in PvP situations, particularly one-on-one. Upgrading this ability will apply a debuff to the target that allows you and your allies to cleanse damage over time from yourself through repeated attacks against that target. It will also make it so that if you've weakened the target, that you will apply Rend, reducing the armor of the target. So using it after Arcane Eruption or Arcane Smite is not a bad idea. And the last upgrade will allow for a follow-up attack that does considerable amount of damage. So highly recommend getting that upgrade if you plan on using this skill at all. And the last active skill here is called Warding Bludgeon. This kind of leaps you up into the ground, slamming your flail down, and this buffs your armor significantly and allies around you. So it's really good if you want to, buff you and your teammates. Again, very good in a party situation. Upgrading this skill will make it so that it costs less stamina to block while this is active, and also so that targets that attack you while this buff is up will actually get stacks of impairment each time they attack into you, causing them to take damage over time. And also, randomly, it can buff one of your party members, empowering them and yourself, and also increasing both of your damage absorption. So it's actually really good if you're playing two-player, or if you're playing in like an expedition or something like that. The capstone for this skill tree is called Human Shield, and it makes it so that when you use a Flail and Shield ability, you will cause a friendly within 6 meters of you to link, and they will take 50% less damage, and you'll take increased damage while linked. It's very good for tanking or PvP, or when maybe you're playing like a duo or questing. But again, it's not a very good capstone if you're playing by yourself, since it doesn't impact anything. So you can see that the Flail and Shield playstyle is really a lot more beneficial when playing in a group, and isn't really recommended if you're playing solo. Moving along to weapons and armor. Weapons that pair well with the Flail are the Great Axe, Warhammer, Greatsword, or even the Life Staff in certain situations, or the Sword and Shield. Pairing with the Sword and Shield allows you to maintain a similar playstyle with similar damage as long as you prioritize strength. The Sword also deals both slash and thrust damage reliably, while the Flail deals strike and arcane, and this allows you to cover all 3 physical damage types along with one other damage type easily. Great Axe, Warhammer, and Greatsword are all great strength scaling weapons, making easy pairings depending on what you want to do. Great Axe is great for AoEing groups of enemies, Warhammer is great for crowd control, and Greatsword can be both an excellent offensive and defensive weapon. The downside of these weapons is they are heavy, making it harder to stay light or medium weight when using them compared to the sword. The reason I mentioned the Life Staff is that it scales with focus, although much better than the Flail, so you could use it as a backup weapon for extra healing or survivability. This can make questing easier along with some PvP, depending on what you're facing. Your Flail would do less damage if you pump focus, but you'd be much harder to kill in general, and there are a couple of Flail abilities that benefit the higher your focus goes. For armor, I suggest going with heavy armor if you want the added block stability bonus of 10%, as well as extra damage mitigation from the mitigated protection passive. This will be useful for going on expeditions where you'll most likely be fulfilling the tank role. If you're going for small-scale PvP or solo questing, I suggest using medium or light armor. Medium is a good middle ground between protection and damage, while light will give you the most damage possible but little protection. Because you can heal easily with the flail, wearing light armor is not as bad as it would be with some melee weapon types. Final thoughts. The Flail and Shield is a solid melee weapon overall, though it leans more to the tank support side than most other melee weapons. It's incredibly hard to die when using this weapon, however, which is sometimes more important than the damage you deal. Additionally, the light attacks have wide horizontal sweeps that easily hit multiple enemies, which is a big advantage in both PvE and PvP compared to some other melee weapons. Unlike the Sword and Shield, it's probably better suited for PvP than PvE because of the healing you can do to allies, which can help keep them alive while you attack. In large-scale fights, it's not always about dealing damage. Sometimes your role is to draw fire and survive, while your teammates handle the heavy damage. So depending on what you're aiming to do, the Flail and Shield can still be a great option in PvE, especially when tanking expeditions. So this wraps up our Flail and Shield build guide. I hope you guys found some useful information here and a better understanding of how you might use this weapon, and can clearly see that it's definitely better used in a group than solo. Will you be using Flail and Shield at the launch of New World Aeternum, or will you be using something else like Sword and Shield? Let me know in the comments below.